On this month's University of Arizona Futures in Digital Learning podcast, we bring you a conversation with Cody House and Drew Santarello from the College of Professional Studies at George Washington University to discuss virtual scavenger hunts.
It became much more of a team building activity than what I'd even imagined it could be. And that was the way that I felt like it could continue to have legs.
Join us as we discuss the difference between scavenger hunts and escape rooms, the value of adding interactive learning activities to your course, and tips for creating your own virtual scavenger hunt. Hello and welcome to the Futures in Digital Learning podcast. I am your host, Adam Davi from UCAT, along with my co-host, Brian Hale. Hey, Brian, how's it going?
Everybody, how you doing? It's going great.
Excellent. And today we have two guests joining us all the way from the other coast. From the College of Professional Studies at George Washington University, we have Cody House and Drew Santarello. We're very excited to have both of them on today to talk about virtual scavenger hunts. And I've had the privilege of working with Cody and Drew through OLC conferences the past couple years. And they put together a really cool virtual scavenger hunt for some engagement activities at the OLC Accelerate conference the past couple of years. And I've had a lot of fun with it. And I did my own kind of knockoff cheap version of it in a course I taught last fall. Not nearly as polished and well produced as what these guys did, but we're going to get into talking a little bit about that and what went into it and how they use it and everything. So, Cody and Drew, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. So, first, more than anything, describe for us what a virtual scavenger hunt is.
Yeah. So. What you were describing as far as what we did for OLC over the last couple years, it's interesting because it evolved from being an escape room activity of sorts, team building escape room activity, then into a virtual scavenger hunt of sorts. So kind of morphed, and Drew will talk a little bit about that later. But I think as far as like kind of the semantics around virtual scavenger hunts, I think it's important to kind of differentiate between a virtual scavenger hunt and a virtual escape room. And I think one of the biggest differentiation or characteristics is there's not a timed element to it. Scavenger or virtual escape rooms typically have you have an hour to get it done, or in the virtual spaceship activity that Drew did this past fall, there was the impending doom of a asteroid hitting your spaceship. So in that regard, there was a timed element to it, but it wasn't as much of a an escape room where you are landlocked and you have no other options but to get out of here. I feel like a scavenger hunt is more of we've created this space for you to bounce around, and you can kind of go, there's some sort of structure to it, there's some sort of order, but in reality, you can kind of just wander around and do some good for yourself and look around at things.
Right. Okay. And I know that part of that timing with the asteroid too was you did there was a synchronous version of it, synchronous activity that was hosted by OLC, but you could also go in asynchronously and kind of tool around as well, right? And that asteroid impending doom wasn't as time based in that asynchronous version, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so in the asynchronous version, you could go in and you had kind of free reign of the spaceship, and you could kind of wander around. The timed element was more for it to be part of an engagement activity, trying to think about how do we get people through this, but also not allow them to just say you have an hour to play around with it. Instead, it's you have 20 minutes or your spaceship's going to get obliterated by an asteroid. So good luck.
That's always fun to go in and that fear of asteroid obliteration.
Yeah, Drew did a great job of creating an environment that made you feel like there was actual pending doom that would really invoke the anxiety of trying to complete a task while the screen around you was kind of shaking a little bit, and there was flashing red to let you know, like, hey,
I was having a little bit too much fun with that. Yeah, for sure.
It was a lot of fun. I will attest to that. So Drew, tell me like what went into this planning and how did you, kind of put this spaceship together?
Yeah, so it was definitely a lot of work from the start. I think one of the most important things was that we had to keep everything super organized because so we used thinglink.com
Okay.
to build it out.
Mhm.
If anyone's ever used that, and so it's a lot of like collecting different elements. So for example, all the rooms in the spaceship
Mhm.
were all digital like 360 renderings that we had just happened to
Mhm.
find online. And then we found, we used ThingLink to kind of connect them together. And then we
Right.
dropped in little nodes and the nodes were interactive, right? So
Right.
I think the first thing we had to do was kind of figure out like, what's the main design of the spaceship going to look like? And then we had to kind of figure out what are our capabilities with
Mhm.
using ThingLink. And I think once we found out not only our capabilities, but our limitations as well, right? So once we found out that we were able to use these nodes and drop in like embed codes and put in anything, then it was
Yeah.
like, all right, so where do we stop? Where do we stop before it gets too much? Because we definitely took on some ideas that were a little
Yeah.
grandeur or whatever. But um, so then besides that, it was just kind of building the whole thing out. It was definitely an interesting process. We learned a lot when we were doing it because there's a lot of things where like great example is we're going through the whole spaceship and there's all these different rooms and stuff, and then we decided at one point, oh hey, let's put a map on it. So like if you look down at the floor, this was like
Mhm.
a 360 video type thing. So if you look down the floor, there's a map. Okay, that's awesome. But now we have to go back into every single room and drop in that map and connect the map so that it connects back to that room. It's like it was a whole thing. So I think it was just really important to kind of, even before we got into things like just map out everything on just like I was just using like paper and pencil and just trying to figure out where all these elements are going and how it's all going to connect.
And I think one of the funny things about as far as why we ended up using doing a a spaceship, Drew, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, was that we had found these 360 images online, and we were like, "Oh, this is cool. Let's make a spaceship."
Yeah,
Because I
I
don't think
always
we actually had whatever the physical space picked out before we found those images. And we were like, "Oh, these images are cool. Let's see if we can find a bunch of them." And we did. We're like, "Perfect.
yeah,
Let's do this."
I think pretty much was the theme for OLC space that year, or was that the previous year? We may have
Was that,
just like went with it.
I think that was like an unofficial theme of space. Was that the Space Chickens year? I
It
think
Yeah,
was.
space
it
chickens. Yeah.
was.
First
Yeah.
year,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So
But yeah, I
that's,
always every time I
yeah.
showed the project to someone, I always said, I just want to preface like I didn't build these images. Like we just found these
Yeah.
and connected them, which makes it cool for educators to be like, I don't have to get a camera and make images. I can just find stuff and connect it. It doesn't have to be 360. Yeah, there could be 2D. So
It would have taken us 2 to 3 years to make all those images to the level of detail that they
I am
did the
not an
renderings and
artist.
everything.
Yeah.
It was slick looking though.
Mm.
It looked good. It looked like movie quality,
It did.
like I'm sitting here with Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum in this spaceship about to destroy the aliens,
It
which I
helps that we're
might have just
sci-fi
dated
nerds.
myself on my movie references there.
Yeah, I think it helped that we're sci-fi nerds too,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
I think that helps add realism to the thing. If you're sitting there trying to get out of a cartoon-based thing, you don't really invest as much. Whereas something that looks like it's 3D rendered
Yeah.
or out of a set of, a Michael Bay movie, you're actually more inclined to try and achieve whatever goal the room is giving you.
Yeah.
And we were able to add like background sound effects of like spaceship humming and engine humming and stuff like that, and with other story elements before and after the actual activity. We had some other elements in there that kind of brought you in and kept you engaged. So it was fun for sure.
So I'm just, kind of picturing you both like in a room with a bunch of like post-it notes and red string, like tying things together and mapping out the path and what everybody's going to do. Is that kind of what it was like, or was it more elegant than that?
I'd say so. I think that was actually for me was one of the trickiest parts. Once I figured out how to use ThingLink, it was kind of like, all right, this is easy, this is fun. And we had actually used it in the past. We had created I helped Cody create a virtual crime scene for police and security studies program
Okay.
at our college, which was cool. So we had a little familiarity with ThingLink, but But I think the hardest part was then being like, all right, how do we connect all this together so that it's
Right.
like an actual usable, game or virtual scavenger hunt, so
Right.
all the elements and in a specific order. So yeah, there are definitely a lot of moving pieces around and
Yeah.
trying to get it.
And one element that Drew, in a way, brought on himself to enhance the experience was for the activity 2 years ago, was that you would move through the space, you had to find these codes and everything, and then you had to go unlock a portal that they would then go to another area of the map that you couldn't access until you did X, Y, and Z. So then
Right.
once you went through that door, you could go access a whole new space in the spaceship, but then you still had to be able to access all the previous stuff. So it was a little bit later on that Drew realized like he actually needed the full experience done, so then he could create completely separate instances that would link to each other. So it was
Okay.
because it's not like a video game where you just have free reign and it's this open, player universe that you can bounce between. You're actually having to create these self-sustained little project files. So he had 3 giant project files, one that was the entire spaceship, one that was 2/3 of the spaceship because of you've unlocked a separate room, and then
Right.
the first third is like the open area where everybody gets access to. And so it adds on these layers of complexity that you don't realize until you get farther along. But as Drew said, I think through experience now, we've learned a lot of these the hard way, and we're better for it now. I think.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
cursed myself so many times. I was like, it'd be a great idea, and then like immediately regretted it. Of course, too, ThingLink doesn't have like you can't copy and paste the full project, so I literally had to build the whole project like three or four times.
Yeah.
And the asynchronous one too was its own project file. So
I
There's
will
something
say now ThingLink will duplicate a project. You can
Oh, there you
duplicate, and they just announced guided tours. So you can be like a talking head thing. They're doing a webinar in May about it.
Oh, that's awesome. I actually
Yeah,
didn't hear about that.
I'm following them because I used ThingLink to create a Biosphere 2 walkthrough. It wasn't by any means interactive, except you could click on different plants and, it would pop up a picture and then you walk down the little pathway to get to the next area. But I like the idea of using it as an escape room or as a virtual, a virtual scavenger hunt and being able to, go and find things and then unlock different areas and rooms and then go back to. Now, one thing that we thought about doing was going back to a previous room, not necessarily going back to the same previous room, but going back to a room that looks like the same previous room that has different interactivity. Did you guys build any of that in?
So that
Yeah,
was
I guess-
exactly. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Drew.
What you were just saying? Yeah.
Yeah, no, you can take it, Cody.
So yeah, so that's what, like when Drew built the interconnected pieces, is that say you move through the spaceship and you see that the engine room is offline, the engines are off, and that's the problem, is that you need to get your engines up and running before the asteroid hits you. But in order to get the engines on, you need to find the key to get to the bridge. So you found the key, you go to the bridge. Once you're on the bridge, you've turned on the engine in a different space that you've now unlocked. So when you go back, the engine is now on. Whereas before you came through and it was all blacked out. Now when you go in, it's lit up blue and the engines are up and running. And so when you came back, and that was kind of that, like where Drew had to create like completely separate instances of the maze, is that, or the scavenger hunt space, is that everything worked to a certain extent initially. Then you've done something else later on. When you come back, it now is a completely different sphere because of your actions that you've had in another space.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's something that ThingLink has recently updated or plan on updating, but like the way that we got around it was that in those instances, we would embed a riddle code, like riddle.com. I don't know if you guys used that before, a little quiz app. And at the end of that, once you answered successfully, you'll get a link. And we had told all the participants, follow this link once you get here, send it to all your teammates, and that's the new instance of the spaceship that you'll be going around. And basically it was just, a copy with some things changed.
There was a lot of communication to the folks of moderating when we were running it, to say, you will get a pop-up will come up after you complete it and you got the correct code. Make sure you get that URL and you share it. And we reiterated that. We actually created a user guide checklist that as people went through, they could write down the codes for each of their spaces. So they kept them all straight. And in that we had like, here are the 3 rules that you should not forget as you're going through. And like one of them was like, make sure you share that URL. because otherwise, Adam's clicking around like, I don't see what you guys are talking about. And it's like, well,
No.
did you get the link? Like, oh, no, I didn't. Oh, well, then
And
you're not even
that
looking.
literally happened.
Yeah.
Actually, like, with the group I was working with, we found the code, we shared it, but then someone didn't get that message and click it. And they were like, where are you all? What's happening right now?
That door doesn't open for me.
Right.
Yeah, it's tough too, because it's not like a multiplayer game where you could see all your other teammates.
Yeah.
Everyone's in their own instance of the space.
And that was one of the things we had to tell people. And I think that's one important thing whenever you are approaching creating these sort of these types of spaces. If you're going to be doing them online synchronously, like say we were doing one together right now, is that we're all playing 4 separate instances of the same experience, that we're not collaborating together actively in the same space. It's not a video game. And I think that's sometimes people that are not as familiar with the technology or with the concept, that's a big struggle for people. And it's something that you actually really need to like reinforce to people at the beginning. Like, this is not a video game. You're not going to be able to control what other people are doing. You can't see what everybody's seeing unless you have somebody share their screen. And that can be kind of nauseating when you're like, nope, look over to your left. Nope, your other left. Nope, go back. And it's just, that's a lot too, for different reasons.
It added especially with the the time-based element to it, it added a little bit of intensity and thrill to it as well, though, with that, and not knowing, like, when you're in the engine room and you're like, okay, type in this code, and someone's like, I don't see a place to type in this code. Like, what button are you pushing? Like, what? And it turns out like they're in the hangar bay, and it's like, you have no idea. And it was like, no, go down the hall, like, get to the engine room now. Like, it felt like you were in this movie.
Yeah.
So, which was cool. It was fun. And, there's, in this case, it was low stakes, right? Like, if we didn't make it in time, like, we weren't actually getting obliterated by an asteroid.
You don't know that. Have you ever read or seen Ender's Game? Like, you don't know what's going on the other end of this game.
So, well, in our minds, we weren't actually. It wasn't.
That's
happening,
what we convinced you of that.
Right. So, so I'm curious though, like, in terms of, doing something like this for an actual course, like, this was a conference engagement activity. It was a lot of fun. But have you put thought into, or have you created anything similar for a course that you are developing or working on with faculty?
And we currently aren't having anything planned out right now, although I'm always trying to push for people to use things like, but then I also don't want to get into the thing where, like, hey, let's use this just to use it, so let's make sure there's an actual scenario. In the past, like I was saying before, we had used it for a virtual crime scene, which was the first time that we were playing around with things like, and it was even more difficult back then, because they've since added a whole bunch of new features that make things a lot easier. But I think that was a good example of one where you got to we actually drove, it was my wife's car, funny enough, drove my wife's car out to a park and like covered it in blood and like set up all these little markers and
not real blood, not real blood.
And yeah, it was great. So the students can go in and kind of walk around like a Google Maps type thing, walk around the car and in the car and look at all the different evidence. And then we had a separate piece where they're back at the lab, we'll call it, and there's more information about all the evidence and stuff like that. And then they can kind of just see how you process a crime scene virtually. So that was definitely a good example. That's cool. And then besides that, I mean, we have used ThingLink for other, ThingLink itself for other activities too. Like I had built out for the sustainable urban planning program that we have. I built out like a virtual walkthrough of a park. So it was like overhead view, and then you can hop in, you can look around.
So I did my cheap knockoff version using H5P, which actually has a pretty cool like virtual 360 tool that you can use. You just can easily add 360 images, which I found on Adobe Stock. And I was like, well, which images kind of match closely together, for something. And I just needed something quickly. I needed to turn 1 week's class session into a virtual session, because there was a holiday that week, and it was like, well, let me do something fun. Let me try this, and we'll put it together. They'll have to go to different rooms, click and find different clues. And I put, just random just clues in different things that they had to click around. And then they had to enter a code at the end once they found that code, to say that they looked at everything, they did it. They went through the maze and found it and have the right code. And it was, and for some students, it was confusing, in H5P, to find the things that you had to click on and, what you had to where you had to enter the code. And then I realized in Google Forms, it's case sensitive for how you want to enter the code. So a bunch of students were entering the right code, but in the wrong case. And so I had to go fix that. So these little things that I didn't think of, right? As I'm doing it, I put it together real quick and said, yeah, I can do this. And so, I guess like you talked a little bit about like how you map this out, but if you were to do this on maybe a smaller scale, like you said, like you don't want to do it just for the sake of doing it, but in some cases, like, if it's something that could be useful. Brian mentioned, the walkthrough of Biosphere. We're talking about virtual field trip type things, a bunch in our office. Like what would be some pieces of advice you would give to kind of maybe start off on a smaller scale for people wanting to do something like this and inject that kind of that fun into their course while also being a useful learning activity?
So I'll touch on that first, because I think that we talked about this prior to our conversation, and it's kind of like the guiding question whenever I know that Drew brings it up to individuals about like, hey, we could consider doing ThingLink, of making sure that there's true value add to what you're doing. And
Right.
and value add can be greatly defined. Like there's a wide range of how you can define that when it comes to your course. Like as you were saying, Adam, you needed something to fill a void and you thought this would be interesting.
Right.
There's value added to that because it's something new that your students haven't done before. It's innovative, it's unique, it's a novel thing for them to hop in and do.
Right.
You wouldn't do it every week, because after like 2 or 3 weeks, they're going to be like, this is terrible. What is wrong with this guy? He's a glutton for punishment and we're bored of doing these childish little puzzles. But if you have 1 or 2 of them, that's a lot of value to that, because it's the novelty of it and it gets them interested again. So when we did the virtual crime scene, I'd originally designed it to where the initial experience would be done using ThingLink and using like VR glasses. Where the individuals would put their phone in and they would actually be able to look around, and there's a little dot that appears on your screen when you're doing it. And if you hover over top of it, when you turn your head towards it, a little circle will fill up and then it will take you to that next space. So users could actually go and experience, but then the entire rest of it, I designed to be just, you would do it on your computer, because I wanted it to be a novel and a value-added experience that was unique to them, to get them interested. And then it slipped a little bit more into traditional and educational experience, where it was a little bit more linear, like there was a little bit more kind of structure to it to make sure that they were getting the educational experience. But that initial kind of how did the flash and bang and wow, to get them interested and get them thinking. But as far as like value add is concerned, that should be kind of that initial guiding question, because otherwise you're going to invest a lot of time and energy. I mean, we're literally having a full conversation about these huge projects we built. Like we spent, I don't even want to, it'd probably be embarrassing the number of hours that we've spent total, Drew, like working on these things together. I know you've spent, 2x, 3x as much as I have. But it's all guided by making sure that there's true value in it. And you're not just doing it because it would be fun to do, that there needs to be a real kind of objective when you're hopping into it.
And I'd say just to tag along with that, and what advice I would give is just you have to make sure that you are super duper organized when you're doing this stuff, because that's one of the issues we ran into. If you were to look at my folder right now of the original project, it's like folders and folders, but it's like it was all a mess. It was like a complete mess, and it just made it so hard to find things. So figure out all the content that you're going to use, whether it's pictures or videos or embed codes and stuff like that. Put them all together. Here's all your photos. Here's all your videos. Here's a Google Doc with all your embed codes that you're going to use, and then just like map everything out. And just make sure that it makes sense and that it's don't take on too much. Like that's it. Like, wouldn't this room be great if it sounded real and it looked real, and then when you turned around this way, Just so many.
Of course, it would all be great if it did all of those things.
Right.
Something I
But what
used
if
when I
this?
was working on the Biosphere 2 thing was I went out and I pulled down a just a very basic Hollywood storyboard document. And usually there's a little square where you can draw a little picture of what you want, and then there's some lines on the side where you can write what's supposed to be happening. Once we got all of our information together, I just went through and filled out step by step. Here's the picture, here's what they need to click on, here's the information that's going to go in there. And that helped me throw all the stuff in there, because putting it into ThingLink, as you guys know, takes like no time at all, really. It's just getting all the stuff organized takes, and getting everybody to agree on what stuff is going to go into the ThingLink was another kind of big mountain to overcome, because you don't want to throw too much information and have people's heads explode because there's just way too much happening. So that was another thing where we had to really examine, we're going to have to cut out some information about these plants or these trees or why precipitation does what it does, etc., because these other items are much more important. So that was kind of a big hurdle to get over, was how much info do we present to the learner?
Yeah, and Brian, I think one thing that is interesting to think about when it comes to building out these kind of spaces is like the entire idea around cognitive load, and being really conscientious of that when users first get into the space, to having a very slow build up to the full experience. That if you throw them in the first room and there's like 9 or 10 nodes and you're like, go explore all of these, it's like they go to the first 2 and their brains are just fried, because their eyes are still trying to comprehend what it is they're looking at, whether it's on their computer, whether it's on a phone, whether it's a headset of some sort. But I think of slowly getting them into that. Maybe, once they've gone into a room or 2, then you can start giving some more interactivity and some more kind of movement and other nodes to click on. But it's just like, as you said, the brain can only process so much. And it's being very strategic with how you deliver that and when you deliver it, to make sure that you're not killing your participants with knowledge that they're never, especially if you want them to remember it later on. If it's just for fun and just pure entertainment, then fry their brain immediately. But if there's an actual educational element to it, you really need to scaffold that information.
Yeah, and just to add on to that too, Brian, what you were saying, I love the idea of the storyboarding. It's kind of like what we did, but it wasn't as organized as it sounds as yours was. Mine was a little more rudimentary. But on top of the storyboarding is then, once you've kind of gotten some iterations of this project, is to test it. I sent it to my teammates like over and over again. I'm like, here, try it now. Okay, now try it again. Tell me what's wrong. Let's do it live, and you could tell me why it sucks. We could try to fix it. So yeah, I think that was definitely an important thing as well, is just to keep testing it and just see where you can find flaws. And
Yeah,
like you said, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, they're going to find stuff that they're going to find ways to break it that you've never thought of.
Yep.
And that's also really important, is finding those things and patching them before somebody else will break it and cause a bigger problem later on. But also getting their feedback of, this works, this is great, this is way too much information, that kind of stuff. That's always really good to hear as well. And our Biosphere thing was aimed for, I think, 5th grade through 8th grade. So that's a really tough audience.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. It's just like when we added the map to the spaceship, it was because like I was designing this thing like all summer before the Accelerant conference, and I was so used to the map that I could walk through the whole spaceship with my eyes closed. And they sent it to someone else, and I'm like, no, you got to be in the bridge. You're not in the bridge. And like, what are you talking about? I don't know why. Like,
what is a bridge?
I was like, yeah. So like I was making it too difficult. We were the whole activity was going to be 10-15 minutes, or I guess the nighttime activity was maybe like 25, but like. You got to think of that. How long is this actually going to take somebody? And in your case, 5th to 8th graders, you would want someone in that age range to be testing it. Because if you have an adult test it, may have different results, right?
Yep.
I think I was going to say another tricky thing that when it comes to the thing, like I think I had talked before about like there's so many different options. It's kind of hard to like limit yourself as to like what are we going to use. So like I'd come up with a node, and like in our case, we were trying to also showcase ThingLink because it was part of the technology test kitchen. So I wanted to use all the different types of things they had. 3D modeling. You can embed videos. You can embed photos. But then for each media, being like, all right, would this be best served as just a photo? Would this be good as just text? Should we link them out to a separate document, a Google form? use one of those riddle quizzes. So it's really tricky to kind of figure out like what would be best for each one of these, and also, like Cody was saying, not to like overload them. So the balancing act.
Yeah. No, and that's important too, is, what is, and Cody kind of mentioned this, like, what's the value add, but also like, what's the purpose? Like, right, how is this hitting the learning outcomes that you want your students to achieve as well? And like, or is it, cool just for being cool's sake?
Yeah.
Or is it actually, getting something? And I think sometimes too, like we, as instructional designers, as learning course designers and whatnot, we can see the value add for these things, and we can see how it could play into a course in a positive way. But then convincing a faculty to buy into it too is not always the easiest thing, right? Because it can be a lot of work, and it can be something, and that needs some upkeep, right? Like, let's say you have an embedded link to an article in there, and then the next semester that has to change. Like, does the faculty know how to go in and change it? Do they have to come back to you? Right. So little things like that to kind of consider and think about as well, as far as how you can kind of keep it evergreen as well, and keep that value add for multiple iterations. But it certainly is something that is different, and I think that in and of itself is valuable for students, especially online students.
Yeah.
It gets a little repetitive, right? When it's like, watch this lecture, read this article, watch this lecture, read this article. Like, what are some different things that we can do as designers? And this was definitely one of the coolest things that I've ever done. So I applaud both of you for putting that together. And do you all still use it? Is it out there in the interwebs for people, or has it been just kind of like, we did it couple times, OLC experienced it, and now I don't ever want to see it again?
I mean, we're not currently using it, although I'd love to. Like, so we used it for the one conference, and then we kind of forced it into the next conference because we're like, we don't want it to go away.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. We're not using it currently for anything. But Cody and I had talked about like, hey, maybe we could somehow recycle something similar to this and do it as like a team building exercise or something like that.
And I think that's actually one of the biggest takeaways that I had from seeing it in action during the 2020 conference when we ran, or 2021 conference when we ran it online, was that it became much more of a team building activity than what I'd even imagined it could be. And that was the way that I felt like it could continue to have legs and be reimagined and repurposed, and actually have a solid foundation to it that other people could, in theory, come in and run it at their institutions, or Drew and I could come in and run it, collaboratively. Just because there is, like we were talking about, there's a lot of communication that needs to go into it. There's a lot of like spatial awareness. There's a lot of practical application, and the beauty of the way that it was set up is that there's a lot of customization that could still go into it. Like, Drew was saying, once we figured out that you could put embed codes in, I mean, like, the sky is basically the limit. I mean, I feel like every web tool has some sort of embed code available, and I don't think we ever really found a limit on what ThingLink could or couldn't handle when it came to embed codes. And so we were limited by the tools that we had access to, whether they were paid or freemium or free versions entirely. But I feel like, that was 2 years ago and a year ago that we worked on that. I mean, there's a lot of new technology that's come out since then that we could, in theory, integrate into there. I mean, not even bringing in the conversation about artificial intelligence, like whether or not you could have like some sort of like weird like MODOK that you could actually talk to like while you're on the spaceship, and like you have like a conversation with an AI of some sort to see if you can like ask them the right riddle to get an answer to it, or they're like your all-knowing person that you go find this information and you come back and you have a conversation with them, and it's like an AI chatbot that is your personal guide throughout the entire spaceship. Like, those are really cool things that you could integrate into it with time and energy and, and mental capacity, of which all of us are very limited on all of this. So Yeah, I think that would be a cool evolution for it to still continue to be used, though.
I just like to point out that we made about 30 minutes in before the topic of AI came up on this podcast.
It's impressive. Yeah, it wasn't even on
it
the predetermined
yeah,
questions either.
yeah. We that's pretty long, I think, considering what's happening right now. So congrats to us. But yeah, that's cool. And I think you're right. We've talked on this podcast before, and I'm sure you all have conversations with your teams as well about community building and in online courses and stuff. And you brought it up, like this is something that can achieve that, right? You get that student to student interaction in ways, and it doesn't have to be in a synchronous setting as well. Like you could still format it asynchronously to still have that community building and still have that interaction with students and get them talking about that. So that's another kind of piece of that value to something like this that that can be beneficial to your course and something to consider. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you both again for coming on and talking about this. I think this was a cool activity. It's a cool thought for anybody who's listening to this and thinking about, okay, virtual scavenger hunts, like what can that look like versus, like Cody, you brought up the distinction, virtual escape rooms at the beginning. There's similar concepts, but kind of different in nature. But anything like that is, kind of different, and you're building that virtual space for students to explore and get after. Hopefully this inspires you. Hopefully we've given you some inspiration. Even though we've talked about how much work it is, it doesn't have to be, right? You create what you want to create and put in the work and get the output that you want to get out of it. And some of us are more detail oriented and obsessive over what we want to create than others, but hopefully this can serve as some inspiration. And we'll include some links in the notes of this podcast to some of the tools that we mentioned on the podcast, so that you can go check them out yourselves, and maybe your institutions will have access to that. I know those of us here at U of A have access to H5P and Adobe Stock. And then, everybody has the free version to ThingLink or can set up a free ThingLink account. Mm-hmm. And then there's 360 images floating all over the internet. Yeah. You just kind of have to know where to look, and maybe your institution has access to a 360 camera that you can check out and go take your own as well.
If not, I know there's directions on the etherwebs about how you can actually use Google Maps to create your own 360 images by just taking a bunch of pictures and it stitches it all together. So, I'd say that's low tech, but it's very high tech, but it's a low tech option.
Exactly.
Alternative. But one thing I do, Adam, I want to point out that you kind of mentioned, as far as this can be a lot of work for faculty members or institutions to want to take on. But I think more importantly, having these examples out there that you can show as proofs of concept of, here's what I would like to do. I think sometimes it's hard. I know that was something that Drew and I really struggled with when we first started proposing this in our college, was that the program directors and the faculty we were working with was just so next level outside of their brain that they were like, I don't understand. And they kept saying, so it's like a video game. And we're like, no, it's not like a video game. Kinda, I guess if it fell into a bucket between non-video game and video game, it would be closer to a video game. So we actually, when we first started, we bought a 360 camera, and we went and we created a proof of concept where we just walked around the car and took a bunch of pictures, took pictures inside the car, and then built a little freestanding project to show them, here's what we mean when we say a virtual tour of the space. Because this was even before, virtual tours of houses were kind of as popular as they are now, where you go on Redfin and you can click around and you can see an entire house without having to go see it. And so we were kind of like before all of that when we first started building this. So I think the work that everybody else has done, the work that you've done and that Drew and I have done, and thousands of other people that have created these, they should finding these as proofs of concept and inspiration to say, I want to create something like this, but slightly different. Or why recreate the wheel? Find something that's close enough and then create your own external activity, asynchronous activity that complements it. And
Right.
they can pair together. And I think that that's where instructional designers and other folks in the industry can kind of really come together to create a lot of new variations of projects that already exist too.
Wouldn't it be great if we had like a nationwide repository of like cool things that we've all built? Right? Yeah.
Be careful what you say. Someone's going to
know.
volunteer you for it.
Right. I'm like, it's a pipe dream. It's way down the road, right? To get
Those are
something like
the
that going.
famous last words of a fool of, wouldn't it be
Yeah.
nice if we did, and then you
Right.
got
And
your new
then,
job.
yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice if we built a spaceship on ThingLink for
Yeah.
hours and
2
hours and
years
hours?
later.
Yeah. Right. Well, I've already lost all my hair, so it's there's nothing left to pull out.
Yeah.
No. Awesome. Well, again, thank you both for joining us. We really appreciate it. And maybe we'll have to both our departments across coast will have to do some more collaboration in the future as well. We'd love to
Absolutely.
pick your brains some more and have you come talk to the rest of our team and I'm sure we have some stuff we can add and share as well too, because some of our team are doing some cool things as well. But that would be neat.
Maybe we can coordinate and we can run the virtual spaceship for your team and do it as a team building activity.
That would be awesome, to be honest. Like if y'all are willing to do that, like I will take you up on that.
We'll change it up so you don't have any insider knowledge on how to
Right, I know.
plan.
Here I'm gonna be like, yeah, we go to this room and then it's the code's right here, and I'm gonna get there and it's gonna be closed.
Yeah.
Like locked. That part of the ship has been blown off into space or something, right? Well,
Yeah.
awesome. Well, cool. Well, hopefully, we can definitely, work something out. And thanks again. And for those listening, we appreciate you listening. Tune in next month for another edition of the Futures in Digital Learning podcast. Thank you.
The Futures of Digital Learning podcast is a production of the University of Arizona University Center for Assessment, Teaching, and Technology. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas you'd like to share with our office, go to the Contact Us link on our website, ucatt.arizona.edu.